is much better than mine are. So bless you for that. And I think it's so happy. It makes me so happy to see you with our flag in your hands, and that flag symbolizes liberty for so many of us, which takes a while to get used to. But I want you all to know that you are really welcome here, and that we respect what you have had to deal with these last few years. We respect the long tradition of your people and what you have accomplished over the years. And I am sure that you will be successful. It's, as you know, a lot of you, I think, are farmers, right? When you have quality seeds, you can put them in foreign soil and they will blossom, they will bloom.
Yeah, I'd like to add, again, on behalf of President Trump, Secretary Noem, we're just so grateful that you guys are here. Everybody within DHS, we've been so excited to be able to get you guys here to process, to vet, everything, so you guys get a really warm start. After I was tracking your flight, 12 hours that you were last night. I'm like, oh my God. So thank you for just the patience of being able to get here.
Wow. What a welcome. What a welcome. My people, a week ago, I brought you the breaking news that President Trump was planning to fast-track white South Africans into the U.S. using taxpayer-funded resettlement programs, according to the investigative newsroom, The Lever. Now, when we posted about it on social media, some people said, no, that's got to be fake news. No way this is real. But guess what? Barely 2 days later, 2 days after my report, they landed live and direct. The first group, 49 of them, arrived at Dulles International Airport in Virginia. Now, this wasn't just any arrival. They arrived with the red carpet rolled out for them, holding American flags and balloons all over the place, celebrating their arrival. And to a VIP greeting and welcome from the Deputy Secretary of State and the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security directly. You saw the video. This was a very VIP group. And now, as the administration scrambles to figure out their settlement plans, these folks might be moving into neighborhoods in Florida, Oklahoma, Idaho. Yes, Idaho. They're being quietly relocated as we speak. Now, the story has exploded. Everybody's talking about it now, from the far left to the far right, from working class Americans to billionaire donors, from white South Africans to black South Africans. Even the president of South Africa himself is now reportedly flying to DC next week for an emergency meeting with President Trump. Because, hey, when a supposedly ally cuts your aid, hits you with 30% tariffs, expels your ambassador, and fast-tracks a group of your own citizens into his country under the banner of white genocide, yeah, that's going to demand a face-to-face. But what's really telling is how people are reacting. Some are calling these migrants true refugees, victims of violence, of land seizures, of reverse racism. They're being framed as innocent targets of a white genocide narrative. Others are calling out the hypocrisy. Where was this fast-track compassion for Haitians, for Sudanese refugees, for Afghan allies left behind? And then there's a third group, the folks sitting in uncomfortable silence, just unsure how to respond. Because this isn't just an immigration story. This is a mirror reflecting America's racial anxieties, who we see as victims, who gets welcomed, who gets ignored. And in many ways, also a reflection of America's racial past. It's uncomfortable for some. Now let's turn to folks back in South Africa. For Black South Africans, there is straight up satisfaction. Good, let them go, bye. So today, we're breaking it all the way down. Not just the headlines, but the reactions, the double standards, the global implications, and what this moment reveals about America's ongoing struggle with race, power, and belonging. We're going to break it down. But first, a big welcome to all of our new subscribers and members. I am so glad you're here. And if you're watching and haven't joined us yet, consider this your personal invitation. Because here at Panda Genius TV, we're not just building a channel. We're creating a global home for Black stories that are told with truth, with intention, and with power. And if that speaks to you, and I hope it does, be sure to hit subscribe, tap the bell, drop a super thanks, or join our membership community where we go beyond the headlines with exclusive content, behind the scenes conversations, and a front row seat to the dialogue shaping our future. Because this isn't just content, it's a movement, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. All right, now, let's break it down.
South Africa.
No, I want them to say they're living what the law says.
These are great technical debates, but the bottom line is that there's not a genocide in South Africa.
That's right.
And we have a refugee program.
I am sure there's been violence
there
against one side or the other.
There has been violence, but that doesn't... Hold on a second. I want to make a point. Violence does not equal genocide.
That's
right.
We
need to be really, really clear about that, because if you look
at the
violence...
dead guy, you may not say that.
No, I would say that, actually. Because if you look at what genocide is, it is very specific that you're trying to get rid of a people, a whole group of people. There is violence in South Africa. They have had a very big uptick in violence. But Black people have seen the brunt of that violence.
Okay.
Not just
Then let me ask this question of the panel.
Africans.
If you get a passport and you're South African, and you have that passport and you're of Dutch descent, and someone else has the same passport, is this a tainted passport? Is it not equal? Are you not a citizen? Do you not have the same rights?
You know what?
Or they're special?
No. You're right. It's the same passport. That means you have to follow the laws. Each person has to follow the laws. And right now, what the Dutch is saying, they don't want to follow the laws of the land. So they're saying their passport, like it was during apartheid, when Africans didn't even have a passport because they had a passport.
I'm hearing them saying, my passport's
card.
not the same, and I fear for my life, and I'm leaving the country. That's what I'm hearing.
I also thought Trump said we're going to enforce immigration laws. And this is not enforcing immigration laws. It's breaking a law that clearly says if there's a genocide, you get to come as a refugee.
Well, he's put a refugee ban on practically everybody else. Most of that everybody else that I can think of are either Black people or brown people. We are seeing right now Cuban mothers torn away as they are breastfeeding one-year-old U.S. citizen child and sent back to Cuba, where there is a cruel dictatorship. We are seeing Nicaraguans and Venezuelans and Haitians, where the country is held in a handbasket, and Cubans who had parole status to come into this country
Anna, fair
be
enough,
told they have to
but
leave.
Let's celebrate one thing together. America is still the country where the persecuted want to come. Period.
Oh, yes,
that's true.
And that's the
but
American
the problem
dream.
is that the white persecuted are being allowed in,
It's still
and the Black and
the
the brown
American
are
dream.
being torn.
Well, for the record, we did allow 20 million people to come here illegally, and this is 50 people. So, I mean,
I get it. Right? The numbers the math doesn't math, but it doesn't mean the facts of the situation are any different. I also just want to take great issue with the thinking that they are being persecuted, that they are suffering a genocide.
Why would they leave their homes?
Because
if everything is fine, why are they fleeing?
Because guess what? They want to come to America like a lot of people in the world.
Oh, the American dream is working? Oh, no, that's horrible.
But we have a system to prioritize people who really need to come here.
Well, that's a debate we can have, and we are.
No,
the
that's
American
not a
dream
debate.
is still the magnet.
It is the process that has been set.
Well, the previous administration had priorities about who to let in, including, all kinds of folks who I would argue shouldn't be here. This administration, I guess, is going to set priorities about who and who not to let in.
So for those of you who are new here or maybe missed our earlier coverage, let me give you a quick recap of how we got here, because trust me, a lot has happened just within the past few months. It all started just a few days after President Trump returned to office back in January. He launched an attack, starting with one of his classic rage tweets, claiming that white South Africans were being treated very badly and that a massive human rights violation was taking place. And then just days later, he issued an executive order condemning South Africa's land reform efforts, claiming that Afrikaners were victims of race-based discrimination and racially motivated property confiscation.
US President Donald Trump says he will cut funding for South Africa over a new land expropriation policy. South Africa defended itself on Monday against attacks on the policy by Trump and his billionaire backer Elon Musk, who was born in South Africa. Without citing evidence, Trump said on Sunday, quote, certain classes of people in South Africa were being treated very badly.
That's under investigation right now. We'll make a determination. And until such time as we find out what South Africa is doing, they're taking away land, they're confiscating land, and actually they're doing things that are perhaps far worse than that.
And then a few weeks later, the Trump administration quietly expanded a fast-track refugee policy, specifically for white South Africans, Afrikaner farmers, and their families. The argument? That post-apartheid South Africa has become dangerous for white landowners. The conservative media, as well as Elon Musk, leading the charge, seized on this narrative, calling it a white genocide. Became a fringe talking point that's been bubbling in far-right circles for years, but now elevated to U.S. foreign policy. And President Trump, well, he listened. He ordered the State Department to prioritize these asylum claims while slashing refugee admissions for Black and brown countries across Africa, the Middle East, and the Caribbean. At the same time, he turned up the pressure on South Africa, cutting aid, imposing tariffs, and in March, expelling South Africa's ambassador, Ibrahim Rasool, after Rasool criticized the Trump administration in a webinar linking MAGA's rise to fears about America's changing demographics. Now, was he lying? No, he wasn't. But since then, the administration has been working behind the scenes, quietly building a pipeline to bring white South Africans into the U.S. as quickly as possible. So that's the background. That's the context. And now, with dozens of white South African families arriving finally here, this policy has moved from fringe talking point to lived reality. It's happening right now. So let's take a look at how folks across the spectrum here in the U.S. are reacting, from the far right to the far left, from Black communities to mainstream media to even celebrities. The responses have been telling.
Guys, I thought it was important that we talk a little bit about what's going on with refugees in this country, because it is nuts. They're not even making an attempt. Donald Trump and his minions are not even making an attempt to hide the blatant racism. So I don't know if you heard about this, but 59 white South Africans, Afrikaners, are being given refugee status and a pathway to citizenship in this country, in the United States. This is happening at the same time that thousands of other refugees, including Afghans, who helped us fight the war over there, who risked their lives to work with American soldiers, including people from Congo and Sudan, where there are actual genocides occurring, and who have been vetted and gone through the refugee vetting process for years, 2-3 years, sometimes waiting in third countries after having sold all of their possessions if they hadn't lost them already. All of those people are being denied.
This South African farmer bullshit, which is the most blatantly obvious racist shit ever. It is blatantly obvious the way that we treat white South Africans, who, by the way, for the most part, and I am generalizing here, some of the wealthiest people are well-to-do people in the country. They speak their language. They own most of the land and the property. And somehow they're being granted a fast track to become Americans while they're trying to cut down on immigration from other countries. You know, you get that from where? From the brown people. On March 7th, Trump took to Truth Social to announce he is offering white South African farmers, quote, a rapid pathway to U.S. citizenship, pointing out that South Africa's new land reform push signed into law last year, which lets the government take land without compensation if the property is not being used and there's no intention to either develop or make money from it. Okay? Now, I'm going to give you some context here. They're not just taking land away from white South African farmers. White South Africans, about 9% of the population, owned 87% of the fertile land. Okay? Today, black South Africans make up more than 90% of the population, and they only hold about 4% of all privately owned land. So what they're trying to do is say, hey, we need to fix an historical injustice and figure out if you're not using that land to farm, then we need to have some of that land, not taking all of your entire farm. That's not what's happening. And we need to what? There needs to be equity. And now people are crying because the playing field is being leveled. And so therefore it is now discrimination.
Hey friends, I haven't come to you from my closet for a long time. And I just wanted to explain this strange story about the 59 white South Africans who came to the country after the Trump administration signed an executive order in February establishing status for Afrikaners, the white ethnic minority in South Africa, after continuing to deny refugees from countries experiencing war and famine like Afghanistan and Sudan. So I wanted to tell you in response, the Episcopal Church said it would terminate its partnership with the government to resettle refugees, citing moral opposition to resettling white Afrikaners. The statement said, it's been painful to watch one group of refugees selected in a highly unusual manner receive preferential treatment over many others who have been waiting in refugee camps or dangerous conditions for years, the Most Reverend Sean Rowe, presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, wrote. The process, of course, of becoming a refugee in the U.S. usually takes months to years, but this group was fast-tracked because, according to President Trump, quote, white farmers are being brutally killed and the land is being confiscated in South Africa. Now, that is a claim that has been discredited by police data. Afrikaners are the descendants of European colonizers who came to South Africa 4 centuries ago and later established the system of apartheid, and that was back in 1948. So why did Trump do this? Well, it was in response to a law signed by the South African president seeking to address land ownership disparities in the country. During apartheid, white South Africans were allowed to seize land and resources from black South Africans, making the majority of the country's commercial farmland white-owned. And in fact, while white South Africans account for approximately 7% of the population, they still own 70% of the farmland in South Africa. I think it's important to note that allies of President Trump, including his advisor Elon Musk, who is South African and whose family benefited from apartheid, as well as Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, have been vocal about what they say is the persecution of white farmers in South Africa. There's something new every day, isn't there, kids? There you go.
Well, aren't these just the healthiest looking refugees I've ever seen? The most nourished, the most well kept, the cleanest, most well dressed refugees I've ever seen. I've never seen such stunningly healthy, good looking refugees in my life. Thank God America offered them refuge from South Africa. Thank God. They look like they could not have even stood another day there. Thank God.
Shame on the United States. Shame. Shame on Donald Trump and his whole administration.
Make this make sense. Trump wants to get rid of all the black and brown immigrants in this country, but yet he wants to import white refugees from South Africa. Make it make sense.
The Africans that are fleeing to America as refugees, that ain't gonna work. I moved to South Africa. Let me tell you, I had met these people. When I came here, I had no idea these kind of people even existed on the earth. I felt like I was in a time warp taking me back to the 1800s.
So South African farmers are fleeing to America because they allege that they are dealing with violence. And I'm confused because Donald Trump just gave them a fast track to become a U.S. citizen. He called what's happening over there genocide. Genocide? So we gotta be all the way real here. Why them? Why do they get the fast track over here to become citizens? There's people all over the world that's dealing with worse conditions than this. Refugees from wars, famines, real genocide. But they're not getting this special treatment like them. No, sir. So what makes this different for Donald Trump? This clearly looked like favoritism. The ultimate protection for the complexion. Trump, the same person that was trying to ban certain people from coming over here from over there. Y'all remember? And all of a sudden we got this open door. He feels so bad about them. When, like I said, there's a whole lot of people going through it, not just them. Somebody make this make sense. Y'all telling me I'm tripping? Do y'all think I'm tripping?
Hey guys, just a word of advice to the white people that came from South Africa that are coming to America, the land of the free. You're coming to America. Welcome to America. I heard you're here now. Here's a word of advice from me to y'all. I know y'all going to be settling in, I heard it's going to be in Idaho and North Carolina. That's where y'all going to be settling. Just a word of advice. The black people here are not like the black folk that you're used to in Africa, the ones that were working for you, the ones that you were talking down on. The African Americans over here, you better not start with them black folk over here.
Hello, Episcopal Church. I'm Linda, and I'm a proud Episcopalian. Thank you for setting a good example of what it means to follow Jesus, love your neighbor, and understand your neighbor includes the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed. For decades, through Episcopal Migration Services, you have been a strong supporter of refugees, helping the tired, the poor, the huddled masses yearning to breathe free, before and after they arrive on our shores. I have a friend who is a white South African. She left because of apartheid, because of the systemic abuse she saw, because she was taught racism growing up, and she knew it was wrong. She is now a U.S. citizen, embarrassed and angry at both her home country and her adopted one. She asked me, where was the U.S. when Black South Africans were being shot in the street for protesting against their marginalization? Instead, the government believes white South Africans are in danger of genocide because of the murders of 8 white farmers. 0.00002% of white South Africans. Meanwhile, in the United States, legal residents, including those here because of persecution in their home countries, are rounded up, detained, and deported. Some are languishing in CCOT. Outside the United States, thousands of people have been waiting years to be allowed to cross our border. The white refugees from Elon Musk's home country have been given vastly preferential treatment. They were screened and cleared within 3 months. They arrived on a U.S. government-chartered plane. In other words, your tax dollars paid for it. They were met by U.S. dignitaries and have been fast-tracked for government benefits and citizenship. Pure and simple, this is what racism looks like. The Episcopal Church has been a staunch supporter in the fight for racial justice, and refusal to work with the Republican government was not based solely on what is happening in the U.S., but in consultation with the Archbishop of Cape Town. The presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, Sean Rowe, said, "I am saddened and ashamed that many of the refugees who are being denied entrance to the United States are brave people who worked alongside our military in Iraq and Afghanistan and now face danger at home because of their service to our country. I also grieve that victims of religious persecution, including Christians, have not been granted refuge in recent months." For those of you who are saying it is awful for the Episcopal Church to stop helping thousands of refugees because of less than 60 people, that is not what is happening. The work is continuing, just without funding or support from the federal government. and without having to adhere to Republican views inconsistent with the Gospels. The needs of the vulnerable, those truly in danger, those without resources, are still a focus of the church. At its core, the Episcopal Church believes in scripture, tradition, and rational thought. We don't just open our doors to the marginalized, we ordain them. Male and female, black, white, and brown, members of the LGBTQ community, DACA recipients, immigrants, refugees, indigenous people, human beings. This is what I learned in the Episcopal Church. Love God, love others. The rest is details. Bye, church. Have a nice day, and keep up the kingdom work.
Here's Joe from Georgia. So Donald Trump earlier this year stopped letting refugees come into the United States. However, undoubtedly he's making an exception. He's making an exception for white residents of South Africa to come in refugee status here in the United States. They've even got their first plane load coming, which the United States government has arranged for them. Now, I do believe that most of us, when they say the word immigrants or refugees or whatever, they think of everybody. But now it's been reduced to an exception for white people only. So, once again, if we don't believe that this immigration war specifically is against black and brown people.
Whew. Now, let's be clear. This idea of a white genocide in South Africa, as I mentioned, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It's a narrative that's been carefully crafted, recycled, and weaponized, starting with apartheid-era propaganda. Back in the 1980s, when South Africa's racist regime was under global pressure, white minority rule was being challenged from all sides. Inside the country, black South Africans were rising up. Globally, sanctions were hitting hard. The writing was on the wall. But instead of reckoning with apartheid, some Afrikaner nationalists started pushing a new story, that they were the real victims, that democracy and land reform would lead to their extermination, that ending apartheid wasn't justice, it was revenge. Fast forward to the post-apartheid years, yes, South Africa faced serious challenges: crime, inequality, economic struggles. But far-right groups, both in South Africa and abroad, took those realities and twisted them into claims of genocide. White nationalist blogs, YouTube channels, and eventually mainstream conservative outlets in the US started amplifying it. By the 2010s, American figures like Tucker Carlson were given airtime to these claims. And then Elon Musk, with his South African roots, threw gasoline on the fire, tweeting about supposed attacks on white farmers. Never mind that official crime statistics showed no evidence of racial targeting or genocide. Never mind that the majority of farm attack victims were still black. But the white genocide myth was just too useful to let go. It became a rallying cry for the far-right global Great Replacement theory. The fear that white populations are being systematically replaced by non-white immigrants and rising birth rates. Sound familiar? That same fear is what animates parts of the MAGA movement. It's why immigration, especially from black and brown nations, became such a political flashpoint. So when Trump fast-tracks white South Africans while slamming the door on Haitians and Africans, it's not just policy, it's ideology. It's part of a bigger worldview about who belongs and who doesn't. And now that narrative has found a new home in U.S. refugee policy. Now let's shift gears and look at the reaction from South Africa and across the African continent more broadly. Because trust me, folks over there have a lot to say about this.
Well, this accusation of white genocide emanating from the White House is a conspiracy theory and a myth that has been floating around echo chambers of right-wing populists and white nationalists for many decades now, particularly within the online space. And it essentially holds the accusation that white South Africans, in particular Afrikaans South Africans, are victims of deliberate, direct, state-sanctioned violence. And anyone who lives in this country, who's awake to the reality of this country, the inequality, the poverty, the unemployment that most Black South Africans have to endure, and including Indian and colored South Africans as well, knows that it's patently untrue.
If they want to leave South Africa, they can bounce, man. Nobody's out here saying, Afrikaner, please don't go. Please don't go. We don't give a crap, man. If you want to go there, go there. The moment they get there, you must know you're still a settler. The local people must still accept you.
Yeah.
They'll still, they become the minority, or even worse. Hey, when are you? What? This is America, huh? This is not Kleinfontein. This is not Orania. You understand what I'm saying?
This is their country now.
This is our country, and do you speak English? You speak English. You guys speak English over there? Ja, praat Afrikaans, baby. Praat Afrikaans? My friend. What do you drink?
Ons kan nie Afrikaans praat nie. Ek kan net Afrikaans praat. Ek kan nie Engels praat nie.
Moenie praat Afrikaans hier nie. This is Dallas, Texas. You know the Cowboys? Can you ride a horse? Afrikaner starts Mrs. Brandy. Suddenly starts to have withdrawal symptoms. Look here, they don't know until we all know. We all know you don't want to be in a foreign land. You've been resettlement. What the hell is that? So these freaking people, these freaking Afrikaners who are actually out here willing to be resettled were not true freaking patriot or freaking true South Africans in that South Africa. For them to give up like this and not have the freaking spirit to fight for their own land.
Yeah.
They would rather resettle there in freaking Dallas, Texas. These are fake guys. You guys can go.
Well, and as far as South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, well, here's his recent comment on the matter.
Conversation with President Trump on the phone, and he said, what's happening down there? And I said, President, what you've been told by those people who are opposed to transformation back home in South Africa is not true. And I added to him, I said, we were well taught by Nelson Mandela and other iconic leaders like Oliver Tambo on how to continue to build a united nation out of the diverse groupings that we have in South Africa. We're the only country on the continent where the colonizers came to stay, and we have never driven them out of our country. So they are staying, and they're making great progress. It's a fringe grouping that does not have a lot of support, that is anti-transformation and anti-change, that would actually prefer to see South Africa going back to apartheid type of policies.
And his next move, he is heading to Washington next week for a face-to-face meeting with President Trump. Diplomatic? Maybe. Necessary? Oh, absolutely. Because when an ally cuts your aid, slaps tariffs on your economy, expels your ambassador, and opens the door for a select group of your citizens under the banner of persecution, yeah, that calls for an urgent conversation. We'll be watching to see how that meeting goes and what the outcome is. So, my people, it's happening. And in a way, these reactions are forcing America to confront an uncomfortable truth. Refugee policy has never been colorblind. It's always been a mirror reflecting our own racial anxieties back at us. And now that mirror is front and center. But beneath all this political theater, something more critical is happening that we need to talk about. Black and immigrant communities, the ones too often sidelined in these conversations, are not just watching. While white South Africans are fast-tracked with open arms, Black refugees and immigrants continue to face bureaucratic walls, systemic neglect, and racialized skepticism. So community groups, faith leaders, and advocacy organizations are mobilizing, holding forums, issuing statements, and pushing for policy reforms that address these glaring inequities. They're educating people on the history of racialized refugee policies, the patterns that privilege whiteness and marginalize others. They're building coalitions across ethnic and racial lines, recognizing that the fight for equitable immigration isn't just about newcomers. It's about dismantling systemic racism in all forms. And they're demanding accountability from local, state, and federal leaders. Because this moment is a stark reminder. Refugee policy in America has always been and continues to be a reflection of who holds power and who is considered worthy of protection. So as this debate rages in the political halls of power and on social media, the real work should continue to happen on the ground in the communities most impacted. There should be calls for justice, for equity, for a system that truly values human dignity across every line of race, class, and nationality. So now let me hear from you. What does this moment reveal about America to you? Where do we go from here? And what should happen next? Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Sandra Babu-Boateng. Until next time, take care. Hey you! Thanks so much for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe and join the family. Also, visit face2faceafrica.com for your daily news and updates on what's going on within the global Black community so you can stay informed.